Here are my two adjusted pieces, and they line up and the side seam lengths are the same. So I'm going to take the two originals aside and I want to work on my front. So I want to decide what button size I'm going to use and add an extension down the center front for the overlap. And your typical extension is 5/8 of an inch, but maybe I want to use a 3/4 of an inch button, so I'm going to make it a 3/4 of an inch overlap instead, or an oversized button. But traditionally 5/8 of an inch is the amount. Create line, offset even. Value positive 0.75. And you can tell that you need a positive number because the little yellow mark shows you that. So I still have my center front line. I'm going to keep that for reference, so I'm just going to modify line swap. Okay, so that's the front of my jacket. This is where my center front is. And I need to decide where I want to put my roll line for my lapel. If you want to keep this shape, you could put your roll line from here to wherever you want your break point. But I would need to come to the outer edge line for my break point and think about where I want it to cross over in the middle. So if I wanted it to cross over right there, then I would need to continue down out here so that the two pieces, when they overlap, actually cross over right here. And I just accidentally put a point there, so I'm going to touch it again and then it disappears. That would work if I were making a roll line that was perfectly flat and I was just going to press it over and it didn't take up any space. But a roll line rolls around and raises up away from the neck. So you could want to come up here and wrap around this corner, but because my roll line, I want it to stand away from the body at least a 1/2 of an inch, and if I was using a blanket wool, maybe I'd want it 1 inch. And in deciding that, instead of putting my line right there, I am going to create my line further away from the edge of the collar. So maybe I should have left that line on there. If I wanted my line right here and I wanted space for the fabric to roll backward, I would add this much extra to the pattern. So instead of having my fold line here, I would have my roll line an extra distance away so that I could, with my pad stitching, have that, how do I help you visualize that? Have that roll over. So this is going to roll back and your lapel would be something more like that and join with that line. So instead of just coming from the edge and folding back, your lapel is going to wrap around and roll over. And that's what this line is for, to approximate the amount of extra space you'll need for that. So I'm going to undo that, and you can choose a shorter break point and roll line. And if I'm pretending for a minute that I'm just folding it while I'm thinking through, and I want my break point up here, so I'm going to continue that down. Okay, so I like that as my break point. I like this as my crossover line. And I'm planning ahead and I'm thinking about my lapel. So I'm creating a map. And if I want my lapel to come clear out over here, I could want it to curve or not. And maybe I want this to curve outward, so I'm going to come back down and join this line down here. But I'm also going to push that out so it curves a little bit away. I don't have to. Do I want it further over the bust point than that? Oh, I didn't mean to set that down. So I am thinking about my collar. My lapel. Do I want my lapel to come clear over to my armhole? I'm going to just leave it where it is, but you can choose where you want to put yours. So I'm joining that edge and I'm joining that line. It's kind of a wide lapel. Okay, and now I want to think about how I want my collar to join it. So if I want the collar to start right here and the notch to be right there, then I could do that. And maybe I want my collar to kind of be a continuation. And then do I want my collar to stand and roll over, or do I want it to be fairly flat? So this is my design line that I want. And I've just mapped out my design line. And I'll finish deciding what to do with my collar later. So I want to save that as my map or on my original piece. I just want to make sure that I don't lose that. So I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to go back to thinking about my roll line. But I'm going to create another 2-point line from here, and I'm just going to pull this one out so that it disappears into my shoulder. And then I'm going to split the line. I want to keep this line, but I'm going to clip it right there. I just know that I want that trajectory. Modify line split. No, clip. I want to clip this line where it intersects with this line, and if it's not clipping properly, it probably means that this line you weren't careful enough with and it isn't actually intersecting with this line. So zoom in on it and make sure that it actually is touching that line. Okay, now I'm going to create another line, and I'm going to right click and say distance from point. Select the point to measure the distance. I'm coming from this one, and I want to come an inch away from that. and I'm coming normally from there. So I'm drawing this line an inch away from my shoulder because I'm pretending that I'm going to make this out of a blanket wool and I need more of a roll line. You might want less. I'm showing you how to do it. You need to decide the amount. Maybe put your fabric with the lining and roll it over and see how deep you want this roll to be, how far away from the body you want it to stand, and how much it rolls over. So this is the amount that it's rolling back. And this is where I want my collar to join. So half of that distance it's going to kind of blend. So that line actually is going to be longer. I'm starting it kind of in the same place, but as it rolls over, it's going to require more space. It will end up back here, but I have moved this out so that we're imagining, I know I drew this before, but we're imagining that this is curving and it's wrapping around on itself. So if my curve comes back out to here, that's wrapping around and landing on top of itself. So you'll want to decide how far that is, and you might need to mirror from that line instead. And part of me wants to just stop and give you the simple version, but we'll continue on. And if this is too frustrating, I'll make a new video. Okay, so I've got my lines, and instead of having this be my mirror line, I need the extra space. So I'm now going to mirror that out here toward the center front, because this piece is now attached, and instead of this being the fold line, we're going to mirror it on the roll line. So create line mirror, select lines to mirror, hold down the control key. I want to mirror all of these lines. And say OK. Oh, well, I did that wrong. I wasn't supposed to say OK. I was supposed to select the line to mirror around. Okay, release, and the line I'm mirroring around is my roll line that includes the actual roll instead of the design line edge. So this is my collar. I probably need to continue my collar over here, and I kind of wish I had it out here a little bit further. So I'll address that on the other side, and when I get to the other side, I'm probably going to move this down and have it join up here instead. So I'll do that again on the other side, but I'm just going to join right there. Okay, so when I trace this piece off, because my roll line comes clear out here into the imaginary space, I'm going to blend it here on my roll line back over here. And that's not perfectly smooth, but I can fix it later. So to trace this, I'm going to keep this as my map in case I change my mind. It's easier to look at it all together. And it's confusing because I've got layers and mirrors happening. But if I trace this, and before I trace this off, I'm going to put in one more thing. I want to put in a pocket, and I can put that pocket anywhere. I can put a diagonal welt or a patch pocket or whatever I want to, but I want to create a rectangle because I want to put in a welt pocket, and I want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6 inches if I want a hand to go in it. So I'm just going to make it be, and I'm going to switch to value, and in my X direction I'm going to make it 1 inch, and my Y direction I'm going to make it 6 inches, and say OK. And cancel. Oh, I canceled. Don't do that. 1 by 6. And say OK. And that number is fine because I'm not going to keep that piece. And now cancel. OK. So I want my welt pocket. Do I want it right on the waist? I think I want it a little bit below. And I'm going to set it down, and I want mine at an angle, so I'm going to modify rotate, and this is a piece sitting here, so I want to rotate the piece. I want to rotate it around this point, and I'm choosing a reference point, but I'm going to switch and I'm going to put it right there. So that's where I'm putting my welt. Doesn't mean it's the right thing. Maybe I need to make it longer, but that's where I'm putting it today. Okay, so now I'm going to create piece trace and hold down the Control key, starting in the lower corner. I'm tracing off my lapel and my shoulder clockwise in order, choosing all of the things and then finishing with that one. And I'm going to release and then re-press the button, and I want my dart and I want my pocket, and do I need any of these other things? I don't think so because I've got my map. I'm going to keep my bust point and say OK. So now this is my front with the underside of my lapel. So if I were imagining adjusted, I'm going to add with lapel. And say OK. And cancel. So I have this piece that includes a very generous roll line that is in that space right there. So this amount, I'm going to trace it off. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing it so you can see it. Trace, control, line. This much of this piece is the additional amount that I added for the space of rolling it backward so that it doesn't have to be just pressed flat. So this is my roll line, and it ends up over here when it folds back. And this is just part of my thought process. It's just the thought process part of the piece. So I canceled that. I could have saved it, but I think you got the idea. Okay, so I've still got my map, and I might need that for something, but I've got my placement. And this is the underside. So if this is my wool part, this is going to fold back and be underneath. And I will need to add some notches to that. Now I want to make a facing that comes along down here. And maybe I want my facing, if I want my facing to be 2 inches wide in the shoulder, I'm going to just give myself a notch there so that I have a reference mark. So I'm going to create a notch, and I'm going to make it distance from the point, and I'm going to come in to here and positive direction 2 inches wide. And how far back? I want my facing to come back here, but I don't want it to be behind the dart, so I'm going to go right on that dotted line. So I'm going to create a perpendicular on line right here at the notch, and I'm going to extend that out. I could have switched it to half. There, now I've only got half of it. And then I'm going to create another one from right there and pull that up. And then I want to blend between those two, so I'm going to create a 2-point curve. And I didn't go back out, I was close to it, so I just started there. And I'm going to blend my 2-point curve right there so it's easier to search. And I could probably trace that off without, but I'm going to modify clip. I want to keep this line until it touches that line, and I want to keep this line until it touches this line, and now I have a nice smooth line right there. And now I can trace off my facing. So create piece trace, hold down the control key, trace off the same piece. This time I'm only going to get the facing part. Okay, and my internal lines, I want to remember that that's my center front. So that's my piece, and instead of this is my jacket, it's my jacket facing, lapel facing. And for fun, I'm going to write down that it's velvet. And say OK. And then cancel. So this piece just sews to the inside and rolls over the other one. And I think I want this piece. So I'm going to create piece trace that too. Control, trace, control. Okay, so I have this piece that I can play with while we're talking, and this is just my roll space. and say okay. All right. So I'm going to pause for a minute. I have this piece. I've saved it. Maybe I want to save it again because I've got more lines on it now. Yes, I want to override it. And I want to take these three and piece to menu. And then I'm going to bring all those back down. That's my facing. That's my piece. Okay. So when I've got these two pieces, I don't want to keep that notch in the corner, so I need to delete that. Uh-oh, what happened here? That means that somewhere when I was tracing off my actual front, it went off and cut that off, and I don't want that cut off, so I'm going to have to redo this piece, because if I line it back up over here, let's see what happened. I'm going to line it up with the armhole, modify, set, rotate, choose the corner, and then the line, corner, and then the line. Cancel, and zoom in and see what I did. So right here it took this line and it cut that off. So it messed up that whole shape. I think I'm going to connect it from the shoulder. Set, rotate this line, and this line is coming to it. Cancel. Okay, that's better. So then this one. So I should have watched that more carefully. Alright, I'm going to move this one out of the way. And I'm going to create line copy this. I forgot to hold down the control key. Create line copy, control. Well, guess what? I didn't create line copy, I created piece copy. Create line copy. Hold down the control key. Choose the lines. Release which piece gets them. This piece. Cancel so they go in the same place. Cancel. So in order for this to work right, I have to split the line and swap those. Modify line split. Right here. And right here. Modify line swap. Control this line. Release. Control for that one. Release. Oh well, that's not any better. So a lot of you get these points. I could stop here and not make you watch this, but so many of you have this problem when I'm helping. I'm going to review it while it's here. Because this has the end point of a line, an upward triangle, I know that there are two lines here, and I just need to delete this point, but I can't delete the point because it's the end point of a line. So I'm going to go to Modify Line Combine, and I'm going to hold down the Control key, and I'm going to choose this side of the line, and then I'm going to choose this side of the line. And I didn't turn the one off, so I'm going to release now. And do you see the point disappeared because now they're all one line? And I'm going to try deleting that point. And that worked. So I'm going to delete that little line. And now I have the piece that I want. So I'm going to combine my lines back together. Control. And then I have the end point of a line here, but I have a line sitting on top of it. I can see the dots going all the way back to here. So I'm going to delete the line. I can't delete a solid line, but I can delete that dotted line. So now that's gone. All right, so back to where we're looking at. Delete notch. Okay, so these pieces, the way they relate to each other, if I've got my wool and my velvet and they roll back on each other, and I'm going to have a 1/2 of an inch in one direction and a 1/2 of an inch in the other, this is how much of it's rolling, and then it's going to come over here. And it will end up laying right here, and it will be attached to the collar, and we'll come back and make the collar. So we've got this much extra ease in there for rolling. Well, now I want my velvet piece to be a little bit bigger than my wool piece because I want the wool to disappear under the velvet. So I'm going to add to my velvet piece, and I'm going to leave my body alone right here, but I want my facing to be bigger, so I need to merge those, combine, Control key, those lines into one. And I want my center front, but I don't, it's distracting how long it is, so I'm going to modify line adjust right here, and that takes this line and just shortens it the way it is. So I've still got my center front. And I'm adding ease to this in both directions right here. So I'm going to create offset uneven, and I'm going to select the point on offset uneven from. I'm going to choose this one. That one's 0. And then I'm going to choose this point, and that one is going to be 0.25. And it's not giving me an arrow, but there it is. And you can see I am not Alright, I'm going to start that over again, and when you look at the box over here, it says select point to offset uneven from, extend to adjacent lines, perpendicular notch position, and I'm choosing the replace button. And I've got it set to value. So select the point to offset even from. This first one I'm going with 0. The second one I'm going with this point, and I want it to be 0.25. but you'll need to be familiar with your fabric to know how much. And say OK. And you can see where that moved. And am I happy with it? Yes. So I'm going to say apply. And OK. So it swapped it. And now it's ready for me to choose another one. And so I'm going to choose this end and say OK to 0. And then choose this end and say 0.25 and say OK. And I like that, so I'm going to apply and say OK again, and it has worked. So I'm going to cancel out of that and set this here so you can see that I actually got what I wanted. So this is a little bit bigger, so that when you ease those together and sew it, my velvet side is going to wrap around my wool side, and when it folds back over here, my wool isn't going to be peeking out from underneath it because I added a little bit. Now, just so we can remember this, if I'm going to be folding back here and rolling, and it will take a little bit more space, but as that rolls backward, the velvet's going to be on the outside, but down here the wool is going to be on the outside. So I want to bump this out 1/4 of an inch so this one stays bigger than the facing on the inside. So I'm going to do that again, but with the hem area. So that was, and I could do it a different way, and I could have done this other one a different way too. This time I'm going to say modify line rotate and select the line to rotate. I want to rotate that one. I'm going to select a point on that same line to rotate around, so I'm choosing this one. And a point to guide the movement, I'm going to come down here and I can pull that out, but I would rather switch to value and type in 0.25 again and say OK. So now this has bumped out a little bit. So when I put these two pieces together, they're all tricky, messed up. This has ease on the outside and this has ease on the outside. So it looks funny, but it's correct, and when you sew that and press it, it will turn out the way you want it to be. It would be a good idea to give yourself a notch about here on both pieces and right here where that changes direction. Now we're going to save those two. I must have already done that one. Okay. And this one, I want to keep the dart. So I'm going to fold down, and I already had mine set to include the fold lines and the notches, so that will work. And so that it works correctly when I add seam allowance, I'm going to modify, combine those lines together. And this looks weird because I have the end point of this line sitting on the outside. And you don't need to worry about it, but if it bothers you, you can go into modify, adjust, and just pull pull this down shorter. And you can still see it and add the line, but it doesn't look confusing. And I need to put on my buttons and buttonhole. And I ended up with my center front line on my facing with the lapel, and I lost it over here. So I'm going to put my center front line back over here so I can put my buttonhole placement on this. But I'm going to go ahead and do it here because you can do it on either one, but you do need to put your button placement on one of them. So I'm going to create on a point multiple points on a line, and I want both ends to receive it. This time I'm going to choose mark points just because it's different than what we did last time. And I want it to go on this line. I'm going to move my thumbtacks because when you move a thumbtack, you touch and release, and that allows it to move. I want my first one to be there. And this time it was our center front, so the line was coming around the other way again. And where do I want my last one? Do I want the button to go all the way to the end? Not on this type of jacket, probably right here. And I only want 3 buttons this time. I could make it higher and only put on 2 buttons. It just depends on what I want, but put on at least 3 buttons, please. Alright, so okay, and the number of points between the start and end, I want 3. So, well, I guess I should have said 1 because that gave me a total of 5, but you know, design choice. So I'm going to say okay, but you put on the buttons that you want there. And because I don't need this line to go all the way up, I'm going to adjust the length of this line and just shorten it here and say okay. So I'm going to save that again. And I'm going to move this grain line. If I had them lined up, I could put the grain line on the center front, but it's fine the way it is. Okay, so what about this? Once that dart's sewn, is when I need to have that on there. So this is actually going to be shaped a little bit differently. So I'm going to modify create piece trace. Control, choose this line where it intersects here and here and here, and release. And do I need any internal lines? No. So I now have this little thing. And this is a throwaway piece, so I'm just going to give it 1 letter and say okay. So why is that a throwaway piece, and what do I need to do now? Well, that little piece actually is going to go down here because once the dart is sewn, it's going to come up there. And if depending on how your factory wants stuff, that's fine. But I'm going to approximate how to see where it would go and where it would end. And I'm going to create a straight line that starts right here where those two intersect. And I'm going to right click and say vertical so that it comes straight down, and I'm going to do the same thing right here. Right click and say vertical, because I want to put this right there between those two lines straight across from where it will be sewn. So even though this is the finished space of my pocket, modify, set, rotate a piece. So the match point on the target piece, oh, it's not going to let me do that. So I'm going to set it down right here, and I'm going to rotate it. Modify, piece, rotate, and it's a piece because it's solid. So I'm rotating this piece, and I'm going to rotate it around this line, and I'm going to choose this end and set it down right there, and that's really close, but I'm going to move it a little bit so that is actually where that pocket's going to finish over there. So this is how my pocket looks finished, but that's the space it will occupy when the dart is sewn. And depending on what your factory wants, they might understand it better if you use this one, but at least you know how to look at it and make sure that it isn't going too far into the center front space. So if I decided I wanted that there, I could create line copy and just hold down the Control key and choose those 3 lines and say OK. Alright, I've made most of the changes that I need to these 2 pieces. They're going to be part of the final jacket. I need to add seam allowance. I added notches to the edge of the facing, and we'll come back to that. I want to make sure that they're saved, and they're both in the menu, so I can probably delete those from my work surface for a while. I'm also getting a lot of pieces that are similar that I don't need all of. So you want to isolate the pieces that you're actually going to use, but you still want to keep your map pieces. And here I've got my back. I need to make a back neck facing to go with that, but I don't want to use this piece for my back neck facing because well, at least I need to think it through. Here's my original back, and I've got, if I verify the line length on the neckline of both of those, they're pretty much the same. And this one doesn't have all of the adjustments to it, but the neck is in its original state. And part of what I'm going to use to control my shoulder line and my neckline is the original shape of this neckline piece. So even though I've made changes to this, I can copy my back neck facing from the original. So I'm going to create it from the original so it has the original orientation, and I'm going to create a new line and I'm going to offset it even because I want this to be 2 inches wide. So I'm going to switch to value and say -2 and OK. And that's going to be my back neck facing. That fits the way I want my neck to fit. So I'm going to create a piece, trace, control, trace it off, say OK, and there it is. And that's going to be my back neck facing. And I'm also going to send that to the menu. So I need to use this to make a lining out of. And maybe I want to set rotate that. Modify, set rotate this point with the beginning of that line and this point with the beginning of that line. And that's good because that's right where it changed and we can see that. And that will go back to the original. And this is our shoulder pad, but the back neck facing is on the inside of the shoulder pad. So the body has to have extra space for the shoulder pad, but the lining is under the shoulder pad and does not need that extra space. So that's a little weird and annoying. So I've gotten to the end of what I need to do for my facings and my map, and I'm ready to start working on linings now. So I'm going to keep these 2 pieces out and I'll come back to the ones that I'm going to use for my sample. So in the next video you're going to need all 3 of these pieces plus the front ones and the front map. So your original front, even though it's not technically a map, we may need to refer to it while we're making our lining.